We're officially halfway through 2026, which means it's time to stop looking at single months and start looking at the whole picture. I want to find out how those predictions I made back at the start of the year actually held up against 6 months of real data. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of breaking down the last month's numbers like we usually do, we're going to do a full mid-year check-in for both Suffolk and Nassau, comparing where we are now to where we were last year. We're also going to cover a couple other things. Breeze Airways just added another direct Florida route out of MacArthur Airport, and there's a massive new piece of federal legislation, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. Just became a law, and it could actually change how homes get built and bought right here on Long Island. So let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Long Island Real Estate with me, Sal Catalano. Somehow we are 6 months into the year, which sounds absolutely crazy. But this is normally where I would break down last month's numbers for you. But like I talked about in the introduction, today I want to zoom out. So back in my 2026 market prediction video, I said I did not think that this market was going to crash, and I also didn't think it was going to explode. I said we'd see steady, predictable growth in a market that's still fighting a supply problem. So today, instead of looking at June, we're going to compare it to the first half. We're going to compare the first half of 2026 to the first half of 2025, and we're going to see if that prediction actually held up. So let's start over in Suffolk County. Let's start with the headline number. Comparing the first 6 months of 2025 to the first 6 months of 2026, the average sold price in Suffolk is up 3.8%, from $655,000 to $680,000. That's steady. That's not a spike, and it's not a stall. That's exactly the kind of growth I talked about back in January. So, starting off well. Homes are selling for about 99.9% of the original listing price year to date, which is basically flat compared to last year's 100.3, but still seeing it dip below 100 is interesting. But it does show we're still in a strong market, just not quite the bidding war frenzy that we've been seeing the last couple of years, which is awesome for buyers. Closed sales, now listen to this, closed sales are down about 3.8% year to date, which sounds concerning until you remember what's driving it. It's not failing demand, it's falling inventory. As of the end of June, the months of supply in Suffolk sits at just 3.1, down 11.4% from last year. Below 6 months is a seller's market. Below 3 months is extremely tight. We're right on that edge and doing our best tightrope impression right now. Days on market year to date is basically flat, sitting at 53 days, which is exactly where it was last year. And this tells you something important. Even with fewer homes to choose from, the pace of the market hasn't sped up or slowed down. It's just steady, which again is exactly what I predicted was going to happen. So let's take a look over at Nassau and see if that tells the same story. In Nassau, the average sold price is up 6.4% year to date, from $780,000 last year to $830,000 this year. That's a bigger jump than Suffolk, and it lines up with what we've seen all year. Nassau tends to run just a little bit hotter on price growth. Sold to list price ratio year to date is sitting at 99.2%, which is essentially, again, just like Suffolk, flat compared to what was last year. Closed sales in Nassau are down 4.8%, and just like Suffolk, that's an inventory story, not a demand story. As of the end of June, month supply in Nassau sits at 3.3, which is down 8.3% from last year. So again, it's the supply. Now here's an interesting wrinkle. Suffolk and Nassau are actually sitting at almost the same level of inventory right now, 3.3 months versus 3.1. Historically, Nassau runs much tighter than Suffolk because of a lot of things, geography. There's simply less land left to build on out there, amongst other factors. So the fact that it's this close means Suffolk's inventory crunch has actually caught up. So congrats, Suffolk, I guess. Days on market year to date actually improved in Nassau, 7.1% to 52 days. Homes are moving a little bit faster there than they were a year ago, which is kind of wild to think about. But that is the 6-month picture for both counties. So let's take a look at what that actually means overall for the island. All right, so if we zoom all the way out on the first half of 2026, here's what I'm seeing. Both counties are up mid-single digits on price. Nobody's market's exploding. Nobody's crashing. That's the prediction I made in the beginning of the year, and that's what happened, so I'll take the win. The real story of 2026, just like it has been for 2025, 2024, 2023, is supply. In each county, the month supply is sitting right around 3 months, which is, like I mentioned before, deep into seller's market territory. It is interesting that the gap between Nassau and Suffolk is closing, and that's definitely something that's worth paying attention to as we finish up the summer market and head into the second half of the year. So if you're a seller sitting on the fence right now, this is about as good of a supply and demand setup as you're going to get. And if you're a buyer, I know it's frustrating, but the days on market numbers tell you something useful. Homes aren't sitting. So as I've mentioned over and over again in these videos, when something comes on that fits and that you're looking for, you need to be prepared. You need to be ready to move. You need to have everything in place. Your whole plan, your pre-approval, what attorney you're going to use, all of that type of stuff. I've covered it in a bunch of videos, and that's what we need, and that's what you need to do. So that's our 6 months for both counties. We'll check back in at the end of the year, see if the pattern held for all 12 months. But so far, that prediction I made at the beginning of the year is looking strong. All right, let's take a look around Long Island and take a look at a story that I was actually pretty happy to see. So Breeze Airways just added another direct Florida route out of MacArthur Airport, this time to Tampa. Flights are going to start in January. They're going to run twice a week, starting on Wednesdays and Saturdays, with introductory fares at under $130, which is cheaper than any time I go to Target. This makes Tampa the 10th nonstop destination out of Islip for Breeze, and it's really keeps building towards MacArthur Airport, quietly becoming a real option for Long Islanders instead of always having to trek out to JFK or LaGuardia or Newark. For anyone who owns property in Florida or has family down there or is just sick of the drive to the city airports, this stuff actually matters. It's a quality of life upgrade, and quality of life upgrades tend to show up in property values over time. People want to live somewhere that's easy to get out of and easy to get back to. Simple as that. All right, now for something a lot bigger. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act just became law. This is being called the most significant piece of federal housing legislation in about 3 decades. And honestly, that's not an exaggeration. The short version, it's designed to increase housing supply by cutting through a lot of the red tape that slows down new construction. Things like environmental review requirements and outdated zoning processes. It also puts new restrictions on large institutional investors who buy up single-family homes, which has been a hot-button issue in a lot of markets around the country, especially Long Island. For Long Island specifically, remember, everything we just talked about in Suffolk and Nassau, month supply sitting right around 3 months, that's our biggest problem right now. Certainly not demand, it's supply. So a federal push towards building more housing and cutting red tape is exactly the kind of thing that could matter here. If it actually gets implemented at the state and local level, it's definitely something that could impact us. That's always the catch with legislation like this. It sets the table, but execution is everything. So this is one we're going to have to keep revisiting. So I'll keep an eye on this and I'll keep updating you guys as it moves up, as it rolls along. So if we zoom all the way out on the first half of 2026, prices are up steadily in both counties, but they're not spiking, but they're also not stalling. Inventory is tight everywhere, and Suffolk is actually catching up to Nassau's level of scarcity. There was also a major piece of federal housing legislation that just became law and could start addressing that supply problem if it gets executed well. Which again, tracks pretty closely with what I said back in January. Steady growth, supply constrained market, and 6 months in, that prediction's holding up. I'm going to give myself a solid B plus. Maybe it's looking like it's going to end up with an A for the prediction, but as of right now, I'll give it a solid B plus. I did predict market supply would be between 2.5 and 3, and we're above 3. So I'll take that caveat. But as always, if you are thinking about buying or selling on Long Island, I would love to be the one to help you. So please feel free to reach out. All of my information is below. I am not hard to find. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you can, because it helps the channel. And I will catch you guys on the next one.